Dear listeners, imagine this. In the heart of a forbidden forest, shrouded in silver mist, the sound of footsteps crashes through the undergrowth like a heartbeat running from fate. A young princess, her royal gown torn and stained with dirt, stumbles forward in fear. Behind her, dark shadows follow, shadows not sent to save her, but to lock her away once more in the golden cage that has crushed her soul for years. Before her lies only silence, tall trees, and an ancient whisper of a glowing creature that can read the hearts of mankind. But is it real? Or just a desperate hope from a heart near its end? But before we continue the story, please support this channel by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Your support truly means the world to us and keeps us inspired to bring you more powerful and emotional stories. And of course, thank you so much to everyone who has already shown their support. You are an important part of this journey. Oh, and don't forget to check in through the comments. Let us know where you're listening from so we can see how far our stories have reached. Now let us return to the story. In the kingdom of Valendra, behind towering castle walls, lived a princess named Elara. Since the death of her mother, the queen, Elara, had never felt warmth within the palace again. Her father, King Aldrin, was not cruel, but distant, hollow, buried beneath the weight of a kingdom he ruled alone. It was as though all love had vanished with the queen's final breath. Elara's days were filled with lessons in diplomacy, politics, and endless introductions to noble suitors. Every man who came was more interested in her crown than her soul. No one ever asked what she wanted. But deep inside her gentle appearance, a storm brewed. Elara longed to breathe freely, to choose her own path, to love not for duty but for truth. One moonlit night, as shadows spilled across the palace floor, Elara made a decision that would change her life. She slipped on a plain cloak, tied her long hair beneath a scarf, and escaped through a hidden passage, one her mother once showed her long ago. She walked into the unknown, past golden fields, and finally, into the edge of the forbidden Moonshade forest. No one entered Moonshade. Legends told of those who entered, never to return. But inside that forest, Elara believed. Maybe her heart could finally be free. The first day, she wandered in circles. By the second, her feet were blistered and her food nearly gone. On the third, rain soaked her skin and spirit. But still she pushed forward. By the fifth day, her body could go no further. Weak and trembling, she collapsed beside a still spring. Her hands clawed at nothing. Her breath came shallow and broken. And then, the mist shifted. Out of the trees stepped a creature unlike anything Elara had ever seen. A white deer, taller than any horse, with silver-antlered branches that sparkled in the dark. Its eyes, deep, glowing, full of memory, did not speak aloud. But in her mind a voice rose, gentle and ancient. "Why do you run, child of the crown?" Tears spilled from her eyes. "Because I am trapped. 'Cause no one sees me for who I am. Only the title I wear." The deer said nothing. But in its silence, she felt something. Something she had never felt before. She felt understood. From that moment on, the deer was never far. It returned day after day, showing her paths to food, guiding her to shelter, and simply watching her, as if listening to every beat of her heart. Strangely, in the middle of that cold, mysterious forest, Elara began to feel more alive than she ever had within the palace walls. She laughed. She cried. She whispered stories to the deer beneath the stars, and though it never answered with words, she always felt its presence inside her. The pain of the past did not disappear, but slowly she began to heal. She began to know herself. But far beyond the forest's edge, danger crept ever closer. Boots pounded against wet soil. Soldiers marched in black cloaks. And leading them Lord Kale, a man of ambition, of darkness, who had long sought the throne through forced marriage to Elara. He had found her trail. And he was not coming to bring her home. He was coming to make her his. That night, as Elara lay resting beneath the trees, her head beside the warm coat of the white deer, the air grew colder, the wind turned sharp, and the stars above flickered, as though they, too, feared what was coming. Darkness began to move. And the hunt had begun. Elara awoke to a silence that felt different, heavier. The forest, which once embraced her like a gentle mother, now pressed against her skin with an unease she could not explain. The white deer stood nearby, unmoving, its glowing eyes fixed toward the trees beyond. Elara followed its gaze. Nothing. Only shadows. Yet her heartbeat quickened. She rose slowly, brushing off leaves from her cloak, the soft moss beneath her feet unable to muffle the tension building in the air. The deer stepped closer. Its breath misted in the cold morning light, and for the first time since they met, it lowered its head, slowly, warily, as if bracing for something it could not stop. Elara placed her hand on its neck. "Is something coming?" she whispered. The deer did not reply, but its silence screamed louder than words. They began to move, deeper into the woods, farther from the path Elara once knew. Trees twisted around them, older and thicker now, their branches curled like frozen hands. The forest here had not seen sunlight in years. Only soft, bluish light slipped through the canopy above. She glanced over her shoulder. Still nothing. But the fear in her chest did not leave. As they climbed a steep hill of rocks slick with dew, she suddenly heard it. Quiet at first, then clearer. A sound she knew too well. The clank of armor. Of voices distant but determined. Soldiers. Lord Kale had arrived. Panic surged through her limbs. "Please," she begged the deer. "We have to go faster." But the deer did not run. It paused, then walked calmly into a narrow passage between two trees, so close together that Elara had to turn sideways to pass. On the other side, she found herself in a hidden glade. A circle of stones stood at its center, half buried in roots and covered in ivy. In the middle of the stones, a single pool of water shimmered with unnatural light. "What is this place?" she whispered. The deer walked to the edge of the pool and looked down. Elara followed, kneeling beside it. The surface reflected not her face, but the halls of the castle, her father sitting alone on the throne. His eyes empty, his hands shaking. Then the water shifted. It showed Lord Kale, his black armor gleaming, a ring in his hand, a vow on his lips, cold and rehearsed. "I will be king," he said, with or without her consent. Elara pulled back from the pool, trembling. "He wants to take me by force." The deer raised its head, and once again, its voice entered her mind. "He seeks power, not love, not peace." "But why chase me?" she cried. "Why not find another?" The deer stepped closer. "Because you carry something he cannot control. The truth of your heart." Elara shook her head. "I don't understand." "You will." The wind picked up. Leaves scattered across the glade. And for the first time the deer turned away, not walking but running. Yes, urgently. Elara followed without question. They ran for hours. Through tangled underbrush, across streams that bit with cold. Elara's legs ached. Her breath burned. But fear pushed her forward. As dusk fell, they reached an ancient grove. Dead trees stood like watchmen, their branches reaching up in anguish. In the center, a hollow trunk gaped like an open mouth. The deer stepped inside. Elara hesitated, then followed. Inside she found warmth. Faint carvings lined the wood walls, glowing with faint gold. They told stories, of the deer, of humans who had come before, of kings and queens who had chosen truth over power, and those who had paid dearly for it. "Who are you really?" she whispered into the dark. The deer turned to her, and this time it did not speak with its mind alone. It opened its mouth, and words came. "I am the guardian of the heart's path. I see what is hidden. I protect what is pure. Long ago your mother walked this forest too. She spoke to me as you do now." Elara's breath caught. "My mother." The deer nodded. "She was not just a queen. She was a seeker of truth. She gave you the gift you now carry. The ability to feel what is real. To see beyond appearances. To walk away from gold and choose what cannot be bought." Tears welled in Elara's eyes. "My father never spoke of that." "He forgot," said the deer. "Or perhaps he chose to forget." Outside, a sharp sound shattered the stillness. The cracking of a branch. Torches flame. Voices. "They're close," Elara whispered. The deer stepped forward. Its body glowed brighter now. "If he takes you, you will lose your voice. Not just your right to speak, but the fire that makes you you. He will silence your heart." "Then I won't let him," Elara said, her voice trembling but clear. Pause passed between them. Then the deer lowered its antlers until they touched her shoulder. "Then you are ready." Suddenly, the carvings around them lit up. The walls shimmered. The hollow tree began to pulse, as though alive. The deer turned toward the back of the chamber and touched its antlers to the wall. Split open. Behind it was a path, a narrow tunnel of roots and light. "Go," said the deer. "This way leads beyond the forest, to the place where your voice can grow. But you must choose. Leave now and escape. Or stay and face what follows." Elara looked back. Outside she could already hear him. Lord Kale's voice. Cold. Dark. "Elara, come out. I will forgive your foolishness. But only once." The deer looked at her. No pressure. Only patience. Elara's hand shook. Her body ached. But her heart was clear. She stepped away from the hidden passage. "I'm tired of running." She picked up a branch from the ground and held it tight. "I will face him." The deer did not stop her. It only stood beside her, as it always had. Together they turned to the entrance. Outside torches flickered, and Kale's eyes narrowed. The cage had come to claim her. But this time she would not enter quietly. Elara stepped out of the hollow tree with the white deer beside her, her bare feet pressing into the cold, damp ground. The torches of Lord Kale's men flickered in the dark like a ring of fire closing in. Shadows of soldiers moved between trees, their armor rattling, their boots breaking branches. And at the center of it all stood Lord Kale himself. He was exactly as Elara remembered. Tall, cloaked in black, his dark hair tied back, his eyes as sharp and lifeless as steel. His gloved hand rested on the hilt of his sword. But it was the smile on his lips that chilled her the most. Controlled. The smile of a man who believed the battle was already won. "Elara," he said, his voice deep and hollow, "you've led us on quite the journey." Elara said nothing. Kale took a step closer. "You ran. You disappeared. Do you realize how that looks to your people? To your father? To me?" She stood firm, the deer still by her side. "I didn't run from fear. I ran from a lie." He laughed, the sound low and mocking. "You speak like a woman who has read too many fairy tales." "No," she replied. "I speak like a woman who has finally woken up." The soldiers fanned out behind him, forming a half-circle. Their spears gleamed beneath the torchlight. The wind whispered through the trees, but the night itself held its breath. Kale's smile vanished. "You are a princess of the realm. Your place is at the throne. At my side." "You don't want a queen," Elara said. "You want a crown." Kale's eyes flared, if only for a second. But that was enough. She'd seen the truth beneath his control. The hunger. The darkness. She could feel it now. How his presence weighed down the forest. How the air itself grew colder around him. The deer beside her trembled slightly but stood its ground. "You think that beast will protect you?" Kale asked, tilting his head toward the deer. "It's just a creature. Magic or not, it can die." The deer's eyes glowed. Elara could feel something stirring in it. Old power. Something ancient. Something sacred. "It's not just a creature," she whispered. "It's a guardian. Of the heart. Of what you've long forgotten." Kale drew his sword in one smooth motion. "Then let it guard you into the grave." Before she could move, Kale charged. Elara barely had time to react, but the deer did. With a sudden surge of light, it leapt between them, its antlers clashing against the blade. Sparks flew. The forest erupted in cries and footsteps as soldiers rushed forward. Elara turned and ran. She didn't want to. She wanted to stay. But the deer's last words echoed in her heart. "Find the voice that cannot be broken." She ran through trees and thorned undergrowth. Behind her, chaos broke loose. The sound of hooves, clashing metal, screams. She reached the glade with the glowing pool again. The water still shimmered, but it was no longer calm. Storms brewed beneath its surface, reflecting not the forest, but the soul. Her soul. Her fear. Her courage. Her choice. "Show me," she whispered to it, her hands shaking. "Show me how to fight without becoming like him." The water rippled. And then she saw it. Not a sword, not a weapon, but her mother. Standing in a forest like this long ago. Her hands held no blade. Only a flower. A gift. An offering. The image faded, and Elara fell to her knees. She began to understand. Power was not always loud. Strength was not always steel. She stood again, just as Kale stormed into the glade. His armor scratched, blood on his cheek, not his own. The deer was nowhere in sight. "Elara," he breathed. "Enough." She faced him, trembling. "Yes, enough." He raised his sword, but she didn't move. "Do it," she said softly. "Kill me if you must. But you'll never have what you seek." Kale's grip tightened. "You think dying makes you brave?" "No," she whispered. "Living with the truth does." He stared at her, confused, furious, lost. And then the deer returned. Silent, bleeding, but standing. It walked between them again, glowing with a dull, broken light. Kale's sword dropped a little. "You don't understand," he said, almost pleading. "I could have saved the kingdom. I could have fixed everything." "No," Elara said. "You wanted to own it, not heal it." And that was when the deer did something Elara had never seen. It bowed to her. Its antlers touched the ground. The forest went quiet again. Light, blinding, bursting from the deer's chest like a sunrise in the dead of night. It struck Kale, not with fire, not with pain, but with memory. Suddenly he staggered back. He clutched his head. He saw himself when he was young, alone, begging for approval. He saw the father who ignored him, the brothers who mocked him, the ambition that had twisted into obsession. He fell to his knees, sword slipping from his hand. The deer stepped back, its glow fading. the strength spent. Elara knelt beside it, tears falling from her cheeks. No, no, please. The deer looked at her weakly. You chose well. Your heart is whole. And with that it lay down. Elara sat there, holding it, even as Kale rose to his feet again. Different now. His face pale. His hands empty. I didn't know, he whispered. No one taught you, Elara said softly. But it's not too late. Kale looked at her, lost, hollow. I don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe not, she said. But you can still choose to do no more harm. The soldiers arrived, unsure of what they had walked into. Their torches lit the glade, their voices hushed. They saw their leader kneeling. They saw the white deer, fallen, glowing faintly even in death. They saw the princess, not with power in her hand, but with sorrow and stillness. Elara stood, and for the first time they bowed. Not because she was royal, but because she had faced what they could not, and remained whole. The forest no longer whispered, mourned. The air was heavy, soaked in a stillness that no wind could break. The moon hung low over the trees like a watchful eye, pale and grieving. Elara sat beside the lifeless body of the white deer, her fingers gently brushing through its soft fur, still warm, but growing cold with every heartbeat she gave to the silence. Around her, the soldiers of Lord Kale stood frozen, weapons lowered, uncertain whether they were witnesses to an ending or the beginning of something they could not understand. Kale himself had not moved. He stood just beyond the glade, his shoulders lowered, his eyes fixed on the deer as if trying to piece together how something so gentle could bring a man like him to his knees. Elara didn't cry. Not because she didn't feel the weight of loss pressing into her ribs, but because the grief had buried itself so deeply inside her, it no longer reached her eyes. It trembled in her breath, lived in the clench of her jaw, and bled into the earth through her quiet presence. The deer had given everything, and yet Elara still remained. I don't know how to go on without you, she whispered to the still body. You taught me to listen to what my heart was too afraid to say. You stood when I could not. You believed when I had given up. Her voice broke. A gust of wind finally moved through the trees, carrying her words into the dark like a prayer sent far too late. Behind her, Kale took a slow step forward. I never knew such a creature could exist, he said. His voice rough with something that resembled regret. And now it's gone. Because of me. Elara didn't answer him. He tried again. I thought ruling meant never showing weakness. That power had to be earned through fear. Through conquest. She looked up at him, her eyes hollow. You feared your own heart. That's why you became the thing you once ran from. Kale didn't respond. He simply sat down on the other side of the deer, placing his hands in his lap like a boy at a funeral, unsure whether he was allowed to grieve. For a long time they sat in silence, princess and tyrant, enemies and mourners. Then from the edge of the trees a soft voice spoke. My lady. It was Commander Alden, one of Kale's senior officers, older. His beard streaked with gray. His armor bore the scars of many battles, but none so strange as this. The men, they await your orders. Elara stood slowly, brushing the dirt from her dress. She looked around. The soldiers were still watching, waiting to know if they were supposed to fight, retreat, or kneel. You followed a man who led you by fear, she said clearly. But fear cannot lead us anymore. We've all seen what it becomes. A few looked away, ashamed. Others nodded slowly. Kale stayed silent. She turned to him. You don't have to rule to make amends. You can start again. But you must choose a path that does not burn behind you. Kale looked at her, broken in a way she couldn't fix. "I don't know how." "Then listen," she said. "To the wind. To your conscience. To what you tried to bury for so long." He looked down. And for the first time, Kale didn't argue. The forest, still quiet, seemed to soften. The glow in the glade faded, but a strange warmth remained, as if the deer's presence had not vanished, only changed. That night, Elara ordered the soldiers to help her dig. Not with magic, not with glory, with hands and sweat and silence. They dug through the night. They dug until their fingers bled and their bodies ached. They dug a resting place beneath the oldest tree in the glade, a place where roots had wrapped themselves around centuries of memory. And when dawn touched the treetops, they laid the deer to rest. Elara placed her necklace, her mother's, on its chest. A promise that not all things had to be forgotten, that some bonds could last beyond breath and time. They covered the grave with wildflowers. When the last handful of soil had been pressed into the earth, Elara stepped back and looked around. There was no throne here, no crown. But the moment felt more royal than any ceremony she had ever witnessed. Then she heard it. Sound. Distant. But growing. A faint rustling in the bushes, followed by the soft, hesitant steps of something approaching. Everyone turned. From the underbrush emerged a young fawn, pure white, its eyes wide and innocent, its legs shaky, uncertain. Elara fell to her knees, overcome. The soldiers gasped. Some stepped back. Others bowed their heads. The fawn stopped at the edge of the glade and looked directly at Elara. Not with the wisdom of the guardian, but with something else. Trust. The kind that begins a new story. The kind that says, "I will walk beside you if you walk gently." Kale approached slowly, cautious, changed. He stood beside Elara and looked at the small creature. "Is it his child?" he asked quietly. Elara didn't answer. She didn't know. But she felt something deep in her heart shift. The fawn took a small step forward, then another. Then it pressed its nose gently against her hand. And stayed. She smiled. Not because she was happy, but because she finally understood what it meant to carry pain and peace in the same breath. And still rise. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. The white fawn stayed close to Elara, never straying far from her side. It followed her not as a creature obeying its master, but as if bound by something deeper, like a shadow born from light. Its presence was a balm to the villagers who returned from hiding, to the soldiers who had dropped their swords and no longer knew who they were without them. Kale, stripped of his power, did not leave. He slept beneath the trees with the men he had once ruled over, and every morning, he rose to help repair the shattered pieces of what he had broken. Houses, fences, hearts. But guilt clung to him like a second skin. At night, he sat alone near the burial site, staring into the stars, lips moving in silent confession to no one in particular. The glade, once full of war cries and fear, was now a place of healing and haunted memory. Every footstep on the soil was a reminder. Every breeze carried echoes of what had been lost. Elara, too, was not untouched by the weight of what had happened. Her sleep was light, broken by dreams that felt like warnings. In one, she saw the white deer's eyes watching her from beneath the ground. In another, the forest stood in flames, and the fawn looked up at her as it turned to ash. Each time she woke with a gasp, the fawn already pressed against her side, watching with those still, endless eyes. One morning, as the fog clung to the grass and the dew had yet to lift, she walked deep into the woods, the fawn trailing silently behind. She did not know where her feet were leading her, only that something pulled her forward, deeper, past the streams and the thick roots, beyond the places she once feared to tread. There, in a forgotten clearing, she found it. A circle of stones, arranged with impossible precision, ancient and unmoved by time. Moss had grown thick over the surfaces, but she could still feel their purpose. Guardians of a doorway not meant for most eyes. The fawn stopped at the edge and refused to follow. Elara looked back at it, and for the first time it appeared frightened. Not for itself. For her. She took a breath and stepped into the circle. The air changed, thickened, hummed. The forest around her blurred, and a cold wind passed through her chest like a question never answered. The trees outside the circle no longer swayed. Time itself seemed to pause. Then she heard the voice. Faint. Familiar. Not with ears, but in her mind. Elara. She froze. It was not the voice of the deer, not the guardian whose blood had stained her hands. It was her mother. Elara, child of balance. Do not walk blindly into light. Shadows walk beside it. Her heart slammed in her chest. She spun but saw no one. I don't understand, she whispered into the silence. More whispers. The trees began to pulse with a silver glow, veins of light threading through their bark like breath returning to a sleeping world. Elara. The deer was not just a guardian. He was a seal. A seal, she asked, her voice trembling. A protector of what must not be awoken. The clearing trembled, a vibration low and deep. The earth beneath her feet seemed to shudder with a groan too old for human time. You must not open what lies beneath. But the path is opening. Your bond, your grief has cracked the seal. Elara fell to her knees, the weight of those words crashing over her like a storm wave. I didn't mean to. I only wanted to save him. To protect what was good. Silence again. Then one final whisper. The deer gave his life to bind the darkness. His child carries the light. But even light casts shadows. The wind snapped back. The glow vanished. The circle of stones dulled to gray once more. Elara stood slowly, her legs shaking, her heart a wild bird in her chest. She turned back toward the path, and the fawn rushed to her side, nuzzling her hand, anxious and restless. She knelt beside it. What are you? She asked softly. The fawn blinked, and in its eyes she saw something she couldn't explain. An echo, a memory, a flicker of knowing that did not belong to something so young. When she returned to the village, everything looked the same. But the peace felt thin, like glass stretched too far. The people smiled, but their eyes were watchful. The soldiers worked, but their laughter held unease. Something had shifted, and only Elara knew why. That night, as she sat by the fire, the fawn curled at her feet. She stared into the flames and tried to ignore the way they flickered wrong. Tried to forget the sound of her mother's voice warning her of seals and shadows. Tried to tell herself that the forest would not take back what it had once given. But deep in the woods, beneath the circle of stones, something had stirred. And the earth was remembering. The wind had changed. Not the kind of change that brushes through leaves or shifts the scent of the earth. No, this change moved like something that had waited centuries beneath the soil. Something ancient, breathing quietly under the roots of forgotten trees. The villagers didn't know it, but they felt it. Birds began to sing at the wrong times. Dogs howled into the nothingness. Fires burned shorter, colder. The sun still rose, but the morning light no longer brought comfort. Elara felt it most when she was alone. The fawn, who once slept soundly by her side, now woke at every sound. Its ears twitched even in sleep. And sometimes when she touched its fur, she felt a pulse beneath her fingers, like the rhythm of something that was not a heartbeat, but a call. As if something on the other side of the world had begun to answer. That night, she returned to the circle of stones. The fawn followed without protest, though it hesitated at the edge once again. Elara stepped inside and waited. Nothing happened. No whispers. No visions. Just the hum of the forest holding its breath. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something. One of the stones had cracked. A hairline fracture ran across its face, glowing faintly with a pale red light. Not bright, not obvious. But it was there. Growing. She stepped back, her breath tight in her chest. Had it been like that before? The forest creaked around her, and for a moment, she thought she heard movement beneath the ground. When she returned, she sought Kale. He had changed, yes, but he still carried the instincts of a man who understood danger, even when cloaked in mystery. She found him mending a well near the southern edge of the village. Sleeves rolled, dirt on his face. "There's something beneath the forest," she said without hesitation. "Something the deer was guarding. And I think it's waking up." Kale looked up slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "And you think it's because the deer is gone?" "No. Not just that." She glanced at the fawn beside her. "I think it's because I loved him. Because I broke something the moment I chose to save his spirit over the balance he protected." He studied her, then looked down at the fawn. It met his gaze without flinching. "What do you want me to do?" She hesitated. "I need you to help me find the rest of the stones. There must be more." That circle wasn't just a symbol. It was a barrier. Kale nodded. "Then we find them." They left that night. Kale, Elara, and the fawn, now named Luma, after the first word her mother ever whispered to her as a child, meaning light, in the old tongue. Luma walked between them like a thread stitching together two broken halves of a past too heavy to carry alone. The first stone was north of the glade, hidden beneath a twisted birch tree with blackened bark. When they found it, the same red glow pulsed from a crack down its side. This one was deeper. The second stone lay near a waterfall where the villagers once bathed during the summer months. Children used to laugh there. Now the water was cold and still, and the stone at its base had nearly broken in half. Each time they approached a cracked stone, Luma would lower her head and release a soft, sorrowful sound, like mourning in the voice of the forest itself. On the third day they came to the ancient caves. Few dared enter even before the changes. It was said the caves connected to the old world, the deep world, where spirits and gods once walked. But they had no choice. Inside, the darkness was thick and living. They carried torches, but the flames bent strangely, as if repelled by the walls. And then they saw it. The third stone. Shattered. Not cracked. Shattered. A gaping hole opened in the earth beside it, pulsing with a soft red glow. Elara stepped forward. Kale pulled her back. "Don't," he warned. "You don't know what's inside." "I need to see," she whispered. And then the whispers began again. Not soft this time. Not gentle. They were louder now. Voices layered over each other. Some familiar. Some foreign. Some sounding like her mother, her father, the deer. Others like cries from a place that had never seen the sky. "Elara! Break the seal! Let it return!" She clutched her head, falling to her knees. The voices clawed into her mind like vines trying to root inside her thoughts. Kale dropped beside her, pulling her away from the edge. "You're not listening to that. Not again. They're not lies," she gasped. "They're truths I don't want to hear." "I don't care," he snapped. "You promised me we'd face this. You don't get to go silent now." She looked at him, trembling, tears sliding down her face. "It's not just about the stones anymore. It's me. I'm the door. My grief. My love. It's all feeding the breach." Kale looked at her, horror blooming in his eyes. What do you mean? I was chosen. The deer didn't just find me by accident. I was born to carry the key. The moment he died for me, the moment I mourned him like the world itself, the lock inside me broke. Kale was silent. Then he looked at Luma, who stood at the edge of the light, eyes glowing brighter than before. She's not just his child, he said. She's his echo. Elara nodded. And I don't know how long she can hold what's rising. In the depths of the cave, something began to move. A gust of hot, foul air burst from the hole. Luma screamed. Not a cry, not a call, but a scream that shook the stones. The torchlight flickered and went out. And in that moment of pitch black, Elara heard one final voice. No longer whispering. I remember you. The air had changed. It no longer smelled of moss or damp stone. Now it was dry, bitter, and laced with the metallic tang of something ancient. Something that had not breathed free for hundreds of years. The caves behind Elara, Kale, and Luma now pulsed with a red glow so deep it seemed to eat the shadows whole. They backed away slowly, not daring to speak. Not daring to look too long into that ever-widening crack in the earth. Outside, the forest had quieted to a stillness that was unnatural. No rustling of leaves. No chirping of birds. Even the wind had vanished. It was as if the world had drawn in a long breath and refused to let it go. They made their way back to the village, only to find the world unraveling faster than they had feared. The trees nearest to the ancient caves had started to blacken and twist. Bark peeled away in strips. Leaves turned to ash in the air. Animals had fled. The village felt abandoned, even though people still walked its narrow paths. Elara entered her mother's old cottage and found her reflection in the mirror cracked down the center. She barely recognized the woman she saw. Is darker. Hair tangled. Skin pale. But what frightened her most was the hollow feeling inside her chest. A space that once pulsed with quiet hope now felt like an open wound. Kale didn't say much that evening. He sat by the hearth, sharpening a blade that hadn't been used in years. Luma lay curled in a corner, her breath shallow. Occasionally, her body would shiver violently, though the room was not cold. I've been dreaming again, Elara whispered. Her voice barely carried. Kale looked up. Tell me. They're not dreams. Not really. They feel like memories I never lived. In one of them I stood before a vast tree. Its roots stretched across mountains. And I could hear it breathing. It spoke to me. What did it say? That I was born in its shadow. That my blood carries the memory of balance. And that I must choose, Kale. I must choose to close the breach, even if it means losing everything. He stared at her. What does it mean, losing everything? But Elara didn't answer. That night the sky turned red. Not from the sun, nor the moon, nor any fire. The red came from within the clouds themselves, swirling and cracking like a wound opening across the heavens. People ran from their homes. Children cried. The river near the eastern edge of the village turned black and thick like oil. From the edge of the forest, the trees trembled. Elara stood beneath the old oak in the center of the village and watched as figures began to emerge from the forest. But they weren't men. They were shades. Tall, shadow-thin things with no eyes, no mouths, only flickering shapes that moved like smoke. They didn't attack. They only stood, watching, waiting. Kale ran to her, his chest heaving. We found the fourth stone. Her heart skipped. Where? In the graveyard. Beneath your father's resting place. Elara followed him without a word. The graveyard sat on a hill just west of the village. It was silent now. The red light from the sky made every headstone cast long, twisted shadows. Kale pointed to a mound of earth slightly disturbed. "We never knew," he whispered. "Your father, he was buried atop it. Maybe he knew. Maybe he chose it." They began to dig. Hands bloodied, breath sharp, they reached the stone just before dawn. It was cracked like the others. But unlike the rest, this one had symbols carved into it. Symbols Elara had only seen once before, in her mother's journal. The language of the guardians. As she traced the carvings with trembling fingers, the symbols began to glow gold. And then the whispers returned. Only this time they weren't cruel. They were pleading. Restore. Remember. Release. Kale stepped back, sword in hand, as the ground began to quake. Suddenly the sky roared, and the red light deepened to scarlet. From the broken stone, a surge of energy exploded upward. Elara was thrown backward, landing hard against the roots of a twisted yew tree. When she opened her eyes, the stone was whole again. But Luma was gone. "Elara!" Kale shouted. She scrambled to her feet, eyes darting. "Luma!" Silence. Then a cry. Dark. Rain. Far off, deep within the forest. Elara didn't wait. Ran. Through thorns. Over roots. Past trees that reached for her with claw-like branches. Kale followed, calling after her, but she couldn't stop. Not when Luma was crying. Not when something inside her told her that the final choice would come soon. That she had only moments before it would all become irreversible. She burst into the clearing where the circle of stones once stood. They were all broken now. All 7. And in the center Luma stood, surrounded by shadow creatures. Dozens of them. They pulsed with the same red energy. Their forms twisted and moved like wind-blown smoke. But they didn't touch her. Luma's eyes glowed white. She was no longer just the daughter of the white stag. She was the vessel. Elara! Kale arrived behind her, panting. Luma looked at Elara, and in her gaze was no longer the innocence of a child, but the sorrow of centuries. The ground began to split. The sky cracked open. And from the shadows a voice emerged, low and ancient. "You opened the breach, Guardian. Now face what you called." Elara stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but she didn't waver. "I will not run. Not anymore." The shadows surged toward her. And the final battle began. The first shadow reached her with a shriek so piercing it tore through Elara's thoughts like broken glass. But before it could touch her skin, a blinding wave of white light burst from her chest, casting the creature backward into the air like ash caught in a storm. The rest paused, twitching, unsure. And for one moment the world held its breath again. Luma stood perfectly still in the center of the stone circle. Her small hands hung at her sides. Her eyes remained white, glowing with a fierce, almost divine light. But she was crying. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks, cutting paths through the ash that now painted her skin. "Elara," Kale said behind her, his voice shaking. "We don't have time, what do we do?" Elara didn't answer, because something inside her was changing. Her heartbeat had slowed, not from fear, but from a strange, heavy clarity. She no longer saw just the shadows or the broken stones or even Kale's bloodied hand clutched around his sword. She saw further, deeper. As if her eyes had peeled back the layers of the world. She could see the strands. They shimmered faintly in the air. Threads of golden light connecting every stone, every breath, every life. Some threads were frayed. Others pulsed strongly. But all led to one place. Luma. She stepped forward. The shadows stirred but did not move. They watched, waiting. Not for her destruction, but her decision. Elara reached Luma and gently placed her hands on the girl's shoulders. The instant their skin touched, She was thrown into a memory that wasn't hers. She stood in a different forest. The trees were taller. The sky was darker. There were 7 guardians standing in a circle around a newborn child, each pressing a glowing stone into the earth. Above them, a stag watched from the hill, white as snow with eyes like burning moons. Its voice thundered into their hearts. This child carries the last breath of balance. Should the stones fail, her heart shall awaken. Elara gasped. She opened her eyes. The white light from Luma was no longer just in her eyes. It had started to leak from her chest, from her fingers, from the soles of her feet into the earth. The ground cracked further. Roots lifted and split like ribs. The forest screamed. "Elara, we have to stop it," Kil shouted. "The village, if this breach widens, everyone will die." "I know," she said. But her voice was hollow. 'Cause she understood now. The white stag hadn't brought her to Luma to save the child. The child had been sent to save her. "Elara," Luma whispered, her voice finally breaking through the trance. "It's too late. The breach has opened. Can feel it inside me. It wants to consume everything. But if I give myself to it, if I let it feed on what I carry, the stones will heal. The balance will return." Elara's chest tightened. "No. There has to be another way." Luma smiled. "This is the way. I am not afraid." Kale took a step forward, gripping Elara's arm. "We can't let her go through with this. She's just a child." "No," Elara said. "She's more than that." The shadows around them began to shift, forming a spiral. The wind rose. Above, the sky tore open completely, revealing a vast chasm of stars beyond the clouds, and from that rupture, a shape began to descend. Massive, antlered, radiant, the white stag. But it was not flesh. It was memory, spirit, like. It landed in silence and bowed its head low. Luma turned to Elara one last time. "You were always meant to guard my heart. But now, I must return it to the world." Before Elara could protest, Luma stepped forward and lifted her arms. The earth responded instantly. The ground cracked wide, swallowing the stones whole. Red light spilled upward, reaching for the sky like fire escaping a cage. The shadows screamed as the wind reversed, pulling them back into the chasm. One by one, they vanished, torn into strands and drawn into the heart of the girl who had once been just a quiet child. Luma's body began to glow with unbearable light. She looked at Elara. "Thank you for loving me." And then she vanished. The stones sealed. The chasm closed. The light faded. Silence fell. Elara dropped to her knees, her body racked with tremors. Her hands touched the ground where Luma had stood, now nothing more than untouched grass. The white stag raised its head. From its eyes, 2 silver tears fell. Then it too began to fade, its body turning to dust, to wind, to stars. Kale stood in stunned silence. "Elara!" She didn't look up. The forest exhaled. Slowly, gently, life returned. But Elara's heart did not. Days passed. The village rebuilt. The trees regrew. People smiled again, unsure of what had saved them, but thankful all the same. But Elara wandered. She walked the forest paths each day, listening, hoping, aching. Then, one morning, beneath the first frost of winter, she found something. A single white feather. Warm. And when she picked it up, the wind stirred. A familiar whisper followed. "I am still here." Elara closed her eyes. And for the first time since the breach closed, she smiled. Dear listeners, from this beautiful and meaningful tale, we can draw a deep lesson about sacrifice, courage, and sincerity. Elara, a princess who was once lost in the heart of the forest, eventually found her true self as a guardian of life and balance. She learned not only to listen to the voice within her heart, but to follow a path filled with pain, loss, and difficult trials, until she became a light to the world around her. The greatest wisdom we can take from this story is that in life, we often do not understand why we are tested, why we must lose things we love, or why we must walk alone. But when we continue to move forward, even when our hearts are heavy with fear and sorrow, we will eventually find meaning in every wound. Every small kindness we plant can grow into a force that protects and saves others. Like Elara, we all have the potential to become guardians of one another, of the earth, and of love that may be invisible to the eye, but deeply felt through sincere actions. This story is fictional, crafted as if real, meant to inspire and motivate us, and to serve as a mirror to reflect the truths of life. It is a story about how a pure heart and a strong soul can change the world, even in silence, even in the stillness of the forest. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If you felt touched, inspired, or simply enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means so much to us and encourages us to keep creating heartfelt stories like this one. And as always, let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We love to see how far these stories are reaching. See you in the next story.